Hey guys, it's Alex
and Amanda.
And we are here from Lady Audaci-TEA, ready to dive right into it. And this is a packed episode because we're covering two very big topics. The Byline Times investigation into the claims that Dan Wooten was paying for tidbits about Miss Meghan Markle during 2019 from allegedly Kristen Jones' partner. And we are talking about what I would think is a disastrous Kenyan trip, but what the Western media is telling us was an all-out knockout success. So again, a lot there. We literally have a script of like 25 pages right now.
It was 31, right, and then I sized everything down. It's a little more manageable. But yeah, there's so much to dive into, and this is after we decided not to cover about half the things we wanted to talk about.
we're like Earthshot, Harry's like new jobs or whatever. Like all other stuff just has to wait. We had to, guys. For the Byline Times investigation, the first questions we started getting immediately was, who are these people? In terms of talking about Kristen Jones and his partner. And I'm going to say now, I'm just going to call his partner the partner. Maybe I should give him a name. We'll call him Sam, actually. Kristen Jones' partner will be called Sam during this. There is a name floating around of who he is. I personally don't want to say it because I ain't trying to get sued. Like, let's not. And I know technically he is a private citizen. Simon Case is not because he's a public servant. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Dan Wooten isn't because he's a journalist and now like a public figure. So that's why they can be named, why their faces aren't blurred.
This is an anti-doxing podcast for me. You know,
exactly.
That's not a place I really want to go, given my personal history.
Even with a piece of shit like this, it's just, we're not comfortable with that. So we're just going to call this guy Sam, okay? So we don't have to say Christian's partner. So Let's start with Christian. Christian, he obviously, we know him because he was a deputy communications secretary at Kensington Palace, and he was hired in 2018. Overall, we know very little about Christian's background, which makes sense because usually we wouldn't know much about these people behind the scenes, whether it's the government or the royals. There is information I do wish we knew, like where does he fall when it comes to like the class scale? We know for a fact he is an aristocrat. Mm-hmm. Because he doesn't have a title attached to his name. But like, I would love to know, are you upper middle class like the Middletons? Are you middle class? Actual middle class? Like, are you working class? Because he did go to Cardiff University. He graduated in 2011 with economics and like honorary degrees. That's not like an Oxford or Cambridge, but it's still a very good university. I think it's ranked at like top 22 in the UK. So definitely something not cheap, you know. From there, he went right into pretty much working for the government. But 2016 is where he really got a good job, and I would think started popping up on the royals' radar as in like one of their aides or something like that, because he started working for like the Brexit department, pretty much. Officially, the Department of Exiting the European Union. He started as a speechwriter, and then he went over to Dave Davis's office, and he was his press officer. And David Davis was the Brexit secretary until he stepped back in July 2018. That's all. I literally almost went into that because that is so fascinating. And somehow we will have to talk about Brexit because I think it'd be fun to also talk about Brexit aligning with what royal engagements were going on and stuff too to sell it. And again, the Meghan of it all during that time.
Right. It's so interesting because I wouldn't necessarily think like, okay, being a Brexit secretary, sure, it shouldn't disqualify anybody from a job. But the fact that the royals looked at that person who had that position and didn't pass them over is interesting to me. Yes, like they clearly don't think that that's political enough to disqualify someone from looking at them or working for them. That's all I'll say about that.
Exactly. And the royals are political, okay? They literally are hiring from certain, political parties. Always from a certain political party, by the way. Yeah. But anyways, so when David steps back in July 2018, we see him also step back from that position, but he immediately goes to the Europe unit for 6 months as a senior policy advisor. He leaves that position in December 2018. We know he was hired as the press secretary for Kensington Palace in 2018. So it was a bam, bam, boom. And that's what I mean. He definitely, I would say, was on their radar by 2016. And an interesting tidbit I like to add about this is that people forget when he started at Kensington Palace, it was obviously for both the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, but that only lasted 5 months. He left in April 2019 and became only the communication secretary to the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge from then on. Just saying. Okay.
Yeah.
This was all unofficially announced in January 2019 with that Sun exclusive. And it was like the pap walk with Meghan looking cute as ever with Christian. And everyone's like, who's this hot guy with her? And the Sun just so happened to break that story.
Does Harry have to be worried? I think I remember that being one of them. It's like, y'all, they just like got married. I don't think he has to be worried.
And I just wanted to go a quick rant on that, because I remember that because first off, that was always billed as that was Meghan's hire. Like, oh, Meghan's got a new press secretary. It wasn't until you got like a paragraph or two into the articles that it was like, oh, this is everyone's new secretary. But all of the headlines, everything was billed as her new secretary. And also, everyone used that pop walk as evidence that Meghan was too Hollywood and wanted to be seen, because everyone assumed she set that up. And I think with everything that's coming out now and finding out about Christian and Sam's relationship with Dan Wootton, their friendship, I think it's pretty obvious that was most likely set up by Christian and Dan. I'm just saying. But it all got put on Meghan's shoulders.
God forbid a woman in a public-facing role have a support staff. Like, hello?
Right? It was, that was always just the way it was reported, I think, is foreshadowing to what ended up happening later on with things that weren't bad were presented to us. Just like this little bit of a tone that something insidious was going on because it's Meghan. And it got worse later on. And we will see that, of course.
Yeah.
On to his partner. We know oftentimes his partner, we're calling Sam, is often referred to him as like his longtime partner. So I don't know how long they've been together, but we definitely know in 2018 they were together. They were serious. They're in a serious relationship. We do know that he is a publicist in the entertainment field. It looks like definitely celebrities. And it sounds like even like reality TV celebrities, all kinds of like that. And obviously Dan, you guys, is a huge showbiz reporter before he got into the royal beat. Like showbiz of the year 5 times, in a row, consecutive years that he has won that title for, I think it's like the British Media Awards or something like that. He's a go-to guy. He has a lot of power and he can make or break people's career. So Byline Times explains that in that 2018 period, when they have evidence that they were getting close, that Sam was an up and coming publicist, and he knew that getting in good with Dan could be really great for him and his clients. They quote it saying, at the time, they were quite a young publicist who had worked for a couple of the London agencies and were keen to get on their career. Dan knew this and made a point of including the publicist in his group, beyond just seeing him at the usual premieres and television events where publicists and journalists tend to rub shoulders.
Yeah, so it sounds like a showbiz relationship, right? Like an industry friendship, but also like, hey, you're going to be useful for me.
Exactly. Totally normal. Which is like, I mean, I'm sure in a way it's like Omid obviously knew someone who was working on Harry and Meghan's team at some point. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just that so far is like normal. Temp check passed. You know what I mean?
It's going to get real not normal real soon here. Spoiler alert.
Very soon, you guys. Like literally this next paragraph. So the source that they're talking to is someone that I guess hung out around them and saw them out a lot. And he explains, or this source, he, she, they, them, is explaining that this was very much a mutually beneficial relationship, though, because Sam is able to help his clients be able to get things in the news that he wants to and to get things out of the news that his client does not want.
Yeah.
Because, as the source says, Dan had a hell of a lot of power with the Murdoch press.
Which, like, a lot of people take Dan Wootton and his quote-unquote reporting, his scoops as gospel and as serious journalism. Yes. We're not some of those people. But I think right here we're seeing that tension, too, between the way that the royals get reported on as this mix between celebrity gossip and actual, like, government political figures, because the latter you would want a more nuanced reporter to be covering in any other sphere. But since the royals have set up this weird media environment around them where they are only giving out statements. They're only handing reporters information. They're really, they act more like publicists for the royal family, like their team, than they do like people who engage with ethical journalism. The waters are so muddy here when you start to think about like reporting and like the act of reporting on the royal family. I don't have a point there beyond. It's just so interesting.
It's so interesting. And I think people too forget, if you look at who's on the royal beat, all of these not only are conservative media outlets, but they're royalist. Yeah. None of these outlets, they will pick on these people. They will call them lazy sometimes. They'll be like, oh my God, you're such an eco-hypocrite, Charles. Yeah. But they will never bring them down because they're royalists at the end of the day. Right. They'll tease about the Rose and William thing, but they're never going to fully expose it because they can't expose the future king as a cheater. If he is.
It's so like weird that it's like a prerequisite to quote unquote reporting on the royals to support the royals. And that's not how I need to remind people when this comes up, that's not how journalism works. If you are a sycophant for the people you're reporting on, you should not be reporting on them.
It's like saying Dumas is like a serious journalist or something, okay, who runs their stuff through blinds and stuff. It's just, some of this is fun and games, but unfortunately, and I think especially if you're American, maybe you can kind of tell it apart, but I think, when you're in the UK ecosystem, this stuff is reported as news. This is news, period. This isn't just gossip, it's news.
Right.
Exactly. Right. That's why it makes me sad, because when you do see some real journalism and a real investigation going on, like Byline Times, you see people trying to well, it's just sources. I don't know. This isn't serious. I'm like, no, this is the kind of work that broke open the Me Too movement. This is actual journalism investigation. Like, do not denounce it because of the Sun or something. you know?
And I think I'll touch on this later in the episode too, but this is what people look at the Byline Times and they call them like trolls and they call them haters and they call them biased. It's like, no, they're just reporting something you don't like, and you are not used to seeing that because you're absorbing all your news from sycophants.
And I will say real quick too, I think what you'll see from the whistleblowers who tried to get this all going, it sounds like in 2019 when they saw what was going on, to why Byline Times is even writing this article. It's not because they have some attachment to Harry and Meghan. It's not even because they particularly feel bad for them. It's because this is a great example of how the British media is corrupt. And all of the shady and illegal and things that should be illegal things that are going on behind the scenes. That is why this is being reported. And specifically for Byline Times, it's again setting up how Dan has been able to abuse his power. Because what we quickly find out with Christian and Sam, one of the ways they're just kind of roped in is how Dan once again has all of these perks from being so powerful at the Sun. You keep hearing about this box seats he has at the OT, which I guess must be like an amazing place to see concerts, because this is actually brought up previously when they're talking about how Dan pretty much like courted someone at HR who was supposed to be investigating him sexually harassing a man, So this seems to be like his thing. I've got all these perks from the Sun, so you're going to be a part of my circle and you're going to be able to enjoy it. We're going to go to Soho House. We're going to the Shoreditch House, all of these things. And this person, the source who is talking about this, is saying that Christian was there sometimes for this stuff too. And that's how he got to know Dan, through his partner and them all hanging out. And they said this would be happening in big groups or just be happening just them out and about. Another really big thing that this Byline Times article brought to us was evidence, not just sources, but like actual evidence. And one of the big ones was the photographic evidence that Dan knows Christian and his partner Sam. And I just have to read the beginning of this intro because I thought it was just exceptionally shady and foreshadowing to one of the really big bombs that happens. So Byline Times says, it's the friendship Prince William's former right-hand man, Simon Case, concluded simply didn't exist. And yet here are one-time royal press secretary Christian Jones and his publicist partner huddling together for an intimate celebratory photograph with Cash for Leaks journalist Dan Wooten. Okay, like I said, the white man shade is just exceptional throughout. They presented us an Instagram photo from Dan's Instagram. I mean, we've got you can see his icon, the check mark. It's got the location, the Ned London, and it's
a
him
date,
in 20,
which is so important.
Yes, a date, March 11, 2018, you guys. So this is what, 6 months before he's hired at KP? So March 11, 2018, we have this photo of Dan with 20 of his closest friends on Instagram. The caption is, "Celebrating with my incredible friends, 3 hearts, you all." Christian is on the very left side. They're like 3 people. He's 3 people away from Dan. And next to him, blurred out, is his partner.
Yeah.
So this was described by a source as a party that was very intimate with his closest friends, and that pretty much Dan went all out, hiring like a private dining room, and then they all hit the town together afterwards, going to the Shoreditch, which I guess is very like exclusive club.
Sure.
And Dan paid for everything. So again, being friends with Dan, you get major perks.
Yeah.
And I will also say, too, I remember when this originally broke in 2021, when the Byline Investigates came out about the letter before action.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, you guys, I have like 27,000 screenshots in my images, and I will find this, I promise. But someone had a screenshot that his partner followed Dan on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that, and everyone being like, okay, well, here we go. I will find it, you guys. But I also remember that piece of evidence. So there is a couple things linking them all together.
Yeah.
And in that Byline investigation report, remember with the legal letter, that's when we find out Harry is saying he has information that they paid up to £4,000 for a single story, 2 different stories in June and July 2019 about the nannying and the godparents. And they were able to identify this because of an internal News UK accounting code.
Ooh. People forget that like payments like that get tracked, which is just crazy.
Yes.
A freelance publicist whose partner is a palace aide.
Okay, yes, thank you. That's kind of big because, again, I got to give a shout out to Sussex Squad, the way they can investigate, okay? Because that, in the original article from 2021, no one is named. They don't name Christian. They just say it was like a palace aide's partner. But everyone, and that was part of the big deal of them finding out that they were like hanging out with Dan and following him, because it was like, oh my gosh, it's Christian Jones. Because I think people thought maybe it was Jason Knopf at first. And then in that, what was also a really big interesting tidbit was that Dan didn't deny that there was payment sent. He only denied that they weren't illegal. That's a
which I
big
love.
one. Yeah, right? Christian Jones, another big thing that happened is Christian Jones ended up coming out and denying it wasn't him, which was interesting because no one named him, and no one else from their staff came out to say, that's not me. Jason Knopf didn't, Simon Case didn't. It was only Christian Jones who came out to say, hey, this isn't me. And obviously it's because his name was really the only one being thrown around.
Well, but and I speak...
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I think that speaks to like the way that I'm thinking about palace aides and like publicity teams and PR people, like their goal is to never become a subject of the story themselves. But the fact that Christian Jones like probably was absorbing all of this talk and seeing his name come up, but also maybe allegedly like knowing on his end, like even if he didn't do anything, he has this partner and he and his partner are friendly with Dan. Like those things to me are established at this point. So like, if you need to cover your ass, that's fine. Nothing against that.
Yeah.
But looking at the context of the situation, I think like we can start to see these pieces fall into place here.
Exactly. This is when it starts getting shady because, example again, if Omid was hanging out with, I don't know, Samantha, that was, I think, Megan's like private secretary.
Her niece or something.
Exactly. Like they're going out to dinners. They're not just seeing each other when they're at engagements or something like that, but they're literally going out to dinners and partying together. That would be a huge issue. It's weird. I mean,
or like someone from the Archwell Foundation. Yeah.
Exactly. And we're talking about this ecosystem. It is like messed up because I remember when the Royal Rota would talk about how they would go out and have drinks with Harry and William. And Harry and William would be like, hey, I didn't like that you wrote this story about me. And then they would have to defend themselves and so on. Like,
so sorry. That's my alarm to start the royal chat on Instagram. If you are not a subscriber, we have daily group chats.
Get in there. Oh, and I love, and her subscription stories are amazing, you guys. Something we will be talking about eventually, one of them. But anyways,
sorry.
It's weird and it's corrupt. And one of the really big things that's happening too in the Byline Times is they are mapping out this timeline of how all of these things begin to overlap. Because once we know that Christian pretty much is going to be, let's say, team William and Kate, not team Harry and Meghan. They explain that's when also like Dan's parasocial relationships with these royals flip. I'm going to read that one of a former friend said about Wooten and his feelings about like William and so on. A former friend of Wooten's told Byline Times that the journalist's allegiance appeared to quickly shift from one prince to another. Dan hated Prince William until around May 2019, they said. Behind closed doors, he didn't have a good word for him. He was always talking about his attitude, but Dan never criticized Harry, really. He never seemed to have much interest at all. Then suddenly in the summer of 2019, he switched. Basically, he was hating on Harry and Meghan. He had previously been obsessed with Prince William, and then he switched to the Sussexes. Again, April, we know that Christian left working for Harry and Meghan and only began working for William and Kate. This source is saying a month later in May, suddenly Dan loves William, hates Harry and Meghan.
So interesting.
I'm just saying. That's why it gets shady, okay? That's why. One of the reasons why. And that's also after Christian solely began working for William and Kate. In April, 2 months later is when the first story in June drops where they are saying there was a payment made. And the first was a nanny story. And it is titled Nanny McThree, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry to get through 3 nannies in 6 weeks for baby Archie. That's Dan Wooten, June 28th, 2019.
Yep.
And then there's the July story a month later. Top secret. Meghan Markle's pals are bookies favored to be Archie's godparents, while Prince Harry is behind ban on names. Dan Wooten, July 5th, 2019. And real quick, like I always found interesting about these is that these headlines use Meghan's image and usually her name. Like the top secret one, it's Meghan. It's a photo of Meghan and her friends. And then in a small circle is a photo of Meghan and Harry and baby Archie. And then you have Meghan Markle's pals where they, but you look into the articles and they're not scathing against them, honestly.
Right.
A lot of them is just telling us this factual information that, hey, yes, even though there's a law for every other commoner peasant out there that this information has to be public, for the royal family, there's a different law. Unfortunate, but that's just the truth of it. And they also, through a source, say that everyone thinks like this is Meghan who's demanding all of this, but it's actually Harry. He wants this to be private. He wants Archie to be a private citizen. But again, it's always Meghan's face and name used for these stories.
Yeah. And like with the nanny story, which I don't even remember, honestly, because I was in the UK at the time, like kind of, or no, I wasn't. I'm getting my timeline mixed up, but I had friends in the UK who were just like so excited about the royal baby being born. Like there wasn't this appetite at that time for like broadly for people to be hating on Meghan and Harry. And like you have this little clip from the article here where there is like this piece where Dan's even writing like sympathetic royal sources have explained the choice of nanny is highly personal and the couple might just want to get it right. And it's making me think about like how it's so easy for spin to be placed on a story like this. Where like a source is talking about Harry and Meghan do not want to rush this or take any risks getting this decision right. It's deeply personal and can depend on the needs of the baby and the parents. And I'm thinking, what if you inserted Will and Kate's name in there? You know, what if this source was talking about Charlotte having 3 nannies in 6 weeks? The only thing that would be different would be the headline, but like that's what people read. That's what people are picking up and absorbing.
Oh my gosh. And that was such an issue in 2019. It was like, did you read the article? And kind of like what we were saying early too with the Christian Jones, like how he was introduced and it was like the pap-off with Meghan and Meghan's press secretary. Again, that kind of like, maybe there shouldn't be anything insidious about this, but also the way they can tell us and present us this information can be. Because that nanny one, during the end of it, you kind of see the kicker where it says, in January, Meghan's female bodyguard departed after 6 months. Assistant private secretaries Amy Pickrell and Heather Wong had left in recent weeks. And then the cherry on top, Mary Teresa Turian Barallo became William and Kate's nanny in 2014 when Prince George was 8 months old. Very clearly letting us know William and Kate can keep a nanny. They've only had one since 2014, but how many have they had? How many turnovers has there
Let's
been?
not even talk about
story.
Let's not even talk about the staff turnover in Will and Kate's offices. Let's not even go there. But
oh my God, yeah. One day we will go there because it makes me so mad because I'm like, they lost so many people in 2019 and people have no clue.
Yeah. But so the issue is clearly not just like what information is this person getting handed, but what are they deciding to do with it and what might be motivating them to do that? Why is Dan Wooten suddenly deciding to keep one royal couple on his good side and throwing the other one to the wolves? Like, that's so interesting. And, you know, we've talked in the past with the timeline of Dan Wooten turning on Harry and Meghan and like hushing up the Rose Hanbury story. Like, that's another aspect of this.
That's a big aspect.
Too, which we like don't have time to get into, but
yeah, again, I promise you guys, especially with the Patreon, we plan on getting into all of these little things along the way because they bring up a couple articles I want to dig into. And I also want to dig into the fact that it was a common feeling that Dan had of not liking William. As far as we know, that was a common feeling among the royal beat before Meghan came into the picture. People often preferred Harry, not William. So trust me, we will get into that stuff.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So one of the things that go on, so this stuff is happening, and it seems on pretty early on, someone had picked up on this. And this is another big piece of this is emails. They are quoting the emails to us we have heard about, but we have never seen. Because again, in that legal letter in 2021, Harry makes it clear that he has people in high places that have seen this stuff and know that this is happening for a fact. And we learned a little bit about who those people are. And it sounds like a couple of our like former colleagues of Dan Wooten's, and one of them is a friend of a colleague of Dan Wooten's. And that in 2019, they were going to Buckingham Palace, the Scotland Yard, or the Met Police, and they were going to Nick Davies, who's a former Guardian journalist and one of the people who like really broke open a lot of these, you know, cash for leaks and hacking scandals. And one of the big things that they reveal, and Nick Davies says this. Okay, I'm just going to read this. It's a little long, guys, but I think it's worth the read because I know not everyone has access to this article. He says, I am retired, but I still got approached with stories 2 or 3 times a week and have to say no to them, he said. But this email was clearly important. There was a clear public interest if there had been misfeasance by a public official. It was important, and there was clearly a chance that what was being said was true. So I boasted it into the hands of people with power. First, Davies reached out to lawyers for the Duke of Sussex, who also passed the information on to Neil Basu. I was in the middle, and I admitted I had no idea if what the email said was true, Davies added. It was detailed information, but the truth was not clear. The police needed some kind of evidence put before a judge to get a warrant to go to Buckingham Palace and search Christian Jones' records and those at the Sun. They needed to meet the source to get a sworn statement or some other form of sworn evidence. I urged them, the anonymous whistleblower, to meet the police who were willing to do so off the record, but the source would not come forward. So, first off, can you all imagine if we woke up and there was a news story about how there was a search warrant to search the private secretary of William and Kate's records for collaborating with the Sun? I want people to picture that and know exactly why it didn't happen.
Right.
Other than the fear. And also why these people were so afraid, because obviously they bring up Dan, which makes me really sad, because they make it clear in this article that these people were terrified of what Dan would do to them if they found out that they were going to be, you know, whistleblowers on him. And that again is established throughout Byline Times investigation about his alleged catfish scandals and paying people and then blackmailing them with these videos that he takes of.
Right.
It just says a lot about the environment the Sun was allowing. And then you will find out later on the fact that William and Kate hired someone who was willing to play ball with this kind of piece of shit. It says a lot of bad things. That's all I'm going to say there. Okay.
Yeah. It's frustrating to say the least.
Very frustrating. Yeah. Very frustrating. They can't get the search warrant, but they do give us the emails of who they were sending out. So one of the first emails they says, if a journalist is using someone's partner to pay Prince William's PR for information about his own brother and sister-in-law, that shouldn't happen. They add, someone in editorials started questioning why stories that were on the front page, that weren't on the front page, were getting thousands of pounds in fees. Sorry. My friend says someone saw a string of payments within a few weeks to the publicist Jones' partner about royals and then asked who this person was. They couldn't understand why a showbiz PR would have had that kind of knowledge. And also, I know people maybe ask, like, why does Dan care about this? And money. Money. Okay?
Yeah.
And Meghan, it was clear she was a moneymaker. And the hate industry around her was going to be just as much of a moneymaker. Like someone has said before, hating Meghan is $1 billion industry at this point.
Yeah.
And they saw the cha-chings early on.
And I think this time period is so crucial for Dan Wootton as a person and as a quote unquote professional, because this is what, I'm not saying this is what put him on the map, but these scoops, like him or hate him, they're accurate information. You know, the fact that he's getting handed this information or is paying for this information, allegedly, that doesn't really matter if what you're putting on the page, like, can then spark a conversation. Because all publicity is good publicity. And people forget, like, Dan Wootton, he's not just a writer, a journalist. He's also a talking head. He had his, I forget what show he was on, but he was on a couple of them. So it's, $3,000, $4,000 pounds. It might be like kind of small potatoes in this world, but it's what that opens up the door to. I think that is also important.
Exactly. I mean, you could say Megxit got him his GB News position. That confirmed that he could be that guy. That was huge. Okay. Huge. Yeah. A little more of what they're saying. Posing as a son's worker friend, the author wrote to Davies, I understand you're now retired from journalism. Perhaps this is not of interest to you directly. You might wish to pass it on to someone capable if you think it's worthwhile. I have no wish to be involved because I would fear for the safety and well-being of my loved ones. You played a pivotal role in exposing wrongdoing at News International. The company, now News UK, claims to be the cleanest media company in the world. It is not. I will give you one example. See where it leads. And then we have the next informant. I think this one's really important because they say he worked there for a short time, but he had access to the payment system. And he seems to be the one who tracked down the tracking number of what was going on.
Yeah. I could read
the email he sent. Yes, please. Yes.
So this person sent an email. Let's see here. He said, everyone at the Sun now has to undergo a strict training to avoid corrupt payments, but at the Sun, they are circumventing this. I know that this because there is one case involving one of the top editors, Dan Wootton, that has been hushed up. The impression my friend gave is that only a few people within the Sun know about it. They've told me before that when the connection was made between Christian Jones, Sam, the partner, and Jones, there was a real sense of panic because Wootton is so powerful within that office. He deals directly with Chief Executive Rebecca Brooks. He has his own radio show. He's forced out a lot of people as he's moved up through the organization. He's tried and succeeded to get people sacked. He is that powerful. Ugh.
Yeah. And we know, from their previous reporting about all these people that he has gotten sacked. And I think that's what's so interesting about this. It's like they were reporting on that because of the catfish stuff. Yeah. But we have emails from 2019 talking about that power that they have, alleged power that they have exposed that he had in that 2019, because he was just at the climax of his power at the Sun. So it's really scary what that they allowed. But what gets even scarier is they have all of these evidence of the payments going through. Yeah. They have the tracking number and they have the evidence. The Sun decides, I'm burying my head in the sand. We're not really going to look into this because, again, it's making them so much money.
Yeah. Yeah. And we don't have to go through all the details because it's we've given you a general idea of like what those payments entailed. But this particular informant also writes, The information was very detailed and questions were asked very discreetly internally about why the amounts paid were suddenly so high about stories possibly involving public officials, which is a big red flag at News UK now. The answer, it was quickly established, was that the publicist, Sam, is the partner of Will and Kate's press secretary, Christian Jones. So it seems that there was some understanding at the news organization that this relationship existed. The informant goes on, by the company's own updated rules, any suspicion of a payment to a public official should be flagged up immediately to lawyers. The reason I'm contacting you is that this didn't happen. I have no reason why, although given the seniority of the journalist and the panic it would cause internally, perhaps that is sufficient explanation.
Yes. And they go on to pretty much confirm that's what happens. The email, one of the other emails says, people internally on editorial started getting suspicious about the scale of payments made by Wooten, looked at it. Someone did some research and found the connection between Jones and his partner, presented it to the same senior execs, who then recoiled in horror at what had been found and stuck their heads in the sand without taking it further. It added, basically, they said, yep. Anyway, let's move on. It's a great story by Dan. I don't think there's any desire to push for it to be investigated. I think the view internally is to let sleeping dogs lie and hope no one ever makes a connection independently. And obviously, that did happen, thankfully. And we know that by the time that Buckingham Palace gets the information, they are pretty much forced to look into it because Harry's going to send a legal letter before action. And Kensington Palace, by BP's like, Kensington Palace, you need to look into this. So Simon Case is on the case. What does he call him? Is he the weasel or the bee? I think he's the bee.
I forget.
Little bee. Byline Times says they've talked to several anonymous sources that were close to the matter, which I'm guessing is the investigation. And what they're pretty much saying is that this happened. They're saying it was supposed to be in depth, or that's what they pretty much presented it as. But Simon Case just seemed to take Christian for his word, which is why you have that shade from that Instagram post, because they're saying on March 11, 2018, there was proof of a friendship.
Yeah.
But Christian Jones is telling him, oh, okay. And again, too, in 2021, when Christian Jones made the statement that, hey, this is not me, I never sold information, nor did my partner, he said he didn't know who Dan Wooten was. This anonymous source is saying, though, when Simon Case investigated him, quote, okay, I'm putting up the little quotations here, investigated him, he said that he did know Dan. So I'm going to read from the article. So he says, quite a long and involved process resulted from Prince Harry's lawyers sending a letter before action to the Sun, one source said. Of course, Christian had to be questioned by his bosses about it. He said that, yes, he had known Dan for a while, but that he did not know him very well, and that Prince William's courtiers, who appointed him, didn't have a problem with it. Okay, I had to read that with a little extra oomph. And then they go on to say, Christian also told them that this partner had indeed been paid by the Sun at the time stated in the whistleblower emails, and for the amounts described, but that the money related to stories about clients his partner represented in the work as a publicist and was nothing to do with Prince Harry and Meghan. One of his partner's clients supposedly had the same name as the Duchess of Sussex. There was the suggestion that this was the reason for some of the money paid and that the timing was just a fluke. On that basis, Christian faced no further action.
It really, to me, it sounds like this story was convenient enough that the palace was just like, okay, that's fine.
Exactly. They knew, like, oh, this is probably bullshit. But again, I'm not going to look into it. If our toes get held to the fire, I can say, hey, Christian told us this convincing story. He lied to us. We're victims too. Because that's what it's giving. That's the setup it feels like here.
Yeah.
And
so then the article.
What's really fun about this. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say it's the Spare reference. Because in Spare, during the Sandringham, am I saying that right? I don't know why I struggled with that one. Sandringham, thank you. During the Sandringham summit, when Harry is writing about this in the book, which was this was the beginning of 2020, like January 2020 going into February. This is when they're setting up, okay, you guys get to have a half in, half out deal, and there's going to be a 12-month transitional period. Which I have a note here that I said awful idea because surely, Harry, why did you think your family will let you all have 12 months of freedom? I mean, okay, but hey, he's in a cult. he's in a cult. Okay.
Yeah.
So after, right? Because you guys remember, Meghan's in Canada, the news has broken, people know they plan on leaving, and they're trying to flesh out the details. And I guess the promise is, fine, you guys get 12 months of a transitional period of half in, half out. You get to retain your security. And in that 12 months, we're going to pretty much flesh out these details and tell the public about it then. So after the summit ends, it's suggested that him and William should go outside and take a walk to cool their heads because they have been just fuming at each other and fighting. So they go outside and he says this is when he brings up this information he has. Now I'm going to read from Spare. I was struck again by the beauty of it all. As in the stateroom, I felt as if I've never seen a palace before. These gardens, I thought they're paradise. Why can't we just enjoy them? I was braced for a lecture. It didn't come. Willie was subdued. He wanted to listen. For the first time in a long time, my brother heard me out, and I was so grateful. I told him about one past staff member sabotaging Meghan, plotting against her. I told him about one current staff member whose close friend was taking payments for leaking private stuff to the press about Meghan and me. My sources on this were above reproach, including several journalists and baristas. Plus, I made a visit to New Scotland Yard. Willie frowned. He and Kate had their own suspicions. He'd look into it. We agreed to keep talking. We now know an investigation happened, but they sided with Christian. It's truly chilling. And once again, I don't care how you feel about Harry. Honestly, I don't like the man half the time, okay? But it is genuinely heartbreaking to me how much trust he has had in his family solely because they're a family when they have showed him time and time again, you are a spare and you will be treated that way.
Yeah.
And again, we saw that.
The fact that he is handling this as a family issue and it keeps coming out that William and Charles are treating it as a family business issue. And that's so heartbreaking because the Byline Times article concludes Christian faced no further action. He retained the confidence of Kensington Palace and later on had a couple of big promotions.
Because it was that year he became William's private secretary, I think. Yep.
So it's not just that he didn't even get reprimanded, he got rewarded.
Exactly. And remember, Jason Knopf has been literally given a medal. So I just like keeping this in mind when we try to pretend like William and Kate are innocent and maybe they're just bad managers and that's all this is. There's evidence to prove there's way more to that. And in this article, they present us that. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, there's so much information here. We're going to save that for our next episode at the end of this month to talk directly about the evidence they have about how the royals responded and pretty much placed Meghan and Harry in a situation that I think can remind anyone of an abusive relationship, unfortunately.
Yeah, because like rereading that passage from Spare now, like a year after the book, well, almost a year after the books come out, I'm reading like new context into it where the summits, the conversations that happened where there was really no satisfactory conclusion for Harry. I think Harry gets left with this the sense of, what was the point? I think the point for Will and Kate, for Charles and Camilla, was to let him talk and like learn more about him, almost even to get the information that he had from his sources, from his visits to the police, like to find out almost what he knew, which is so insidious because
they wanted to contain him.
I think
they wanted to contain him. Yeah. Like, let's play this game. We care, Harry. We care. Because they knew Harry was a loose cannon at that point, which we know just from him deciding to comment on Dan Wooten's Megxit story. They could have not commented and just let that go away and then on their own time announced it. But I absolutely believe Harry took advantage of that and said, you all keep doing this to us, so I'm going to play your game now and I'm just going to pull the trigger on
no contact.
Exactly. It's really sad, and you will see how they are able to prove just how insidious this got for Meghan and Harry and how just even... I mean, we will definitely do something for Spare when the anniversary comes up because just how he explains that summit and what was happening, it was trickery all the way. Because I think another big aspect for them too is for them to be able to say, hey, we tried to work with him. Hey, we gave them options, you guys, but he just wants to act like a brat,
And even after, I'm glad Harry waited. When Queen Elizabeth passed away, I'm glad Harry waited for the release of his book so he could add that little epilogue in almost, where he talks about after the funeral, before the funeral, when he arrives back in the UK, the first thing his family asks him is about his lawsuits and like what's going on there. Hello? Like they think they're being slick, and I don't think they are.
Oh my gosh. And also, before we transition to Kenya, we have to leave this with saying shout out to Harry and Elton John and all the other claimants.
Oh my gosh,
it's official. They're going to court, you guys. They're taking, this is the Mirror, I'm pretty sure. They're taking the Mirror to court for claims of hacking during like the late 90s. It's going to court. Yeah. This is huge. And once again, I'm seeing this on Twitter outside of the royal fold being talked about because people are saying, hey guys, look, finally, once again, maybe there's a chance for us to expose how toxic the British media system is and maybe a chance to try to change that. So
now,
yay on that.
The funniest part of this is it is a victory. The Daily Mail spin doctors are already earning their Christmas bonus. The headline today, are you ready? The headline about the lawsuit being able to move forward. Major setback for Prince Harry and Sir Elton John privacy case as the judge rules they cannot use confidential information supplied to Leveson inquiry. So the news is that they can take the case to court, but the Daily Mail is focusing on the judge also ruling that there was significant public interest in preventing the claimants from deploying confidential documents in their case.
Oh my God.
So that's where they're choosing to focus. And obviously we'll go more into this, but that is my that was the first I saw it. I was like, wait, no, I'm pretty sure he won this.
Right? And the people who are only going to read the headliner and be like, that Harry, he's just going to
he got what he deserved.
Loser.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
fun.
Very unserious people in the British media.
Yes. And also speaking of losers, Charles and Camilla.
Don't. They're trying their best. All right.
Camilla's are charming sitting in the car.
Listen, oh my gosh. I didn't even we can get into it. So this is somehow old news by now, even though it was just a week ago. But Charles and Camilla, they did their first state visit to a Commonwealth nation of his reign. It was a 4-day state visit to Kenya, where they visited a few different places from Tuesday, October 31st to Friday, November 3rd. So state visits, if you follow me on TikTok, we talk about this every time there is one. There's always a few goals when we go into state visits. The royal family, they name them whenever they announce. They say, specifically here, they're undertaking a state visit to Kenya to celebrate the warm relationship between the two countries. That's always a given. And the strong and dynamic partnership they continue to forge. The visit comes as Kenya prepares to celebrate 60 years of independence. Then they underline that Charles' first visit to the Commonwealth, that this is his first visit to a Commonwealth nation, and that it is to the country where Queen Elizabeth became queen, where she found out that her father had died and her reign officially began. So they're underlining the symbolism here. What was that?
You said so sentimental.
Right. Symbolism, sentimentality. Yeah. But it's also a business trip to them, to the British. And we'll get into what it looks like to other people. But the royal family also, they underline that the visit will, quote, reflect the ways in which Kenya and the United Kingdom are working together to boost mutual prosperity, tackle climate change, promote youth opportunity and employment, advance sustainable development, and create a more stable and secure region. So there are these big, lofty goals here, which you always have that language when we go into a state visit, because there are diplomatic concerns. There are meetings that happen. There are discussions of trade agreements and economic links and all of that stuff. But what does the world see is always my question. What are we taking away from this visit just by observing it? And I think that's those are two very different things, right? Because what Charles is getting out of the visit, what Kenya is getting out of the visit, and what the public is getting out of it, very, very different.
And even what is the Kenyan government getting out of it versus the Kenyan citizens too?
Right.
Big difference. Always
absolutely.
A big difference.
Because
governments and the people.
Going into the state visit, you had people, royalists, who were very excited about the celebrations of the links between the two countries. And whenever I use that language in my TikToks, I always get people that's a funny way of saying that they were colonized. It's true. That is a funny way of saying literally.
That's the relationship.
But both of those things are true somehow, right? There are these strong cultural ties. There are also very, very strong moments of pain from the past. So all of that is going into this trip.
And I also, just real quick, I think that's also an important way too of how this stuff is modernized, though, this type of language. You know what I mean? Like, they colonized them, but now we talk about that history as a friendship. You know what I mean? How there's so much growth for us. And like, we just had some angst and like we came back together. You know what I mean? Like, enemies to friends or enemies to lovers type of trope. And it's like, no, that's not what happened. But it sounds better that way. It sounds great in the press releases, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of press releases, way down at the bottom of the press release and the webpage about this visit, the royal family goes on, the palace. The King and Queen's program will celebrate the close links between the British and Kenyan people in areas such as the creative arts, technology, enterprise, education, and innovation. Then, in the same paragraph, there's not even a line break. This visit will also acknowledge the more painful aspects of the UK and Kenya's shared history, including the emergency, 1952 to 1960. His Majesty will take time during the visit to deepen his understanding of the wrongs suffered in this period by the people of Kenya. So I think right there, too, like that whole paragraph is very frustrating. But right there, you have a little bit of the motivations for Charles, too, right? Like, it's a bit of image building for him, which we're going to get into. But also he gets to boost all of these causes that he wants to have associated with his reign. So like, and that runs the gamut from being the king who listens and learns about these painful histories to like the climate change activist, which is his number one thing, I would say. I mean, even Camilla on this trip gets some FaceTime with her pet charity causes. She visited a library. Literacy is one of her causes. And she visited, I think, 2 sexual and gender-based violence charities that support victims of that. Yeah. There's so much getting packed in here.
A lot got packed. Holy crap. And these people are old. I got to give them credit, man. They do a lot during these 3 to 4 days. Oh,
they do.
Goodness.
Multiple visits a day, multiple outfit changes a day, which like, good luck even getting me to do that. And I'm 28, you know?
Right. And like, I know Camille's hurting.
Oh my gosh, we're not going to see her for like a month, I'm pretty sure. Once she's done with all of the Remembrance Day things, I think she's going on a retreat. Yeah.
And it's kind of well-deserved.
Well, debatable.
That's actually, I know I said that and I was like,
So Charles and Camilla, the big thing for any state visit is a state dinner, a banquet, something. And this is normally when people are like, ooh, what tiaras are going to get worn, right? There were no tiaras, which applause, like good on Camilla for knowing that call. You didn't want to put a tiara on to have a state dinner at Nairobi House. But they also recognized that a state dinner is their chance to make this statement that everyone is looking for. The Kenyan Human Rights Commission issued an open letter calling for an apology for how the history of British and Kenyan interests have like actively harmed Kenyans. So that was the context going into this. People wanted an apology for Britain colonizing and subjugating Kenya, even though it was in the past. We're talking about the 1950s and 60s, right? It's not, not that far in the past. So here's what Charles ended up saying in his address at the state dinner. He said, "It is the intimacy of our shared history that has brought our people together. However, we must also acknowledge the most painful times of our long and complex relationship. The wrongdoings of the past are a cause of the greatest sorrow and deepest regret. There were abhorrent and justifiable acts of violence committed against Kenyans as they waged a painful struggle for independence and sovereignty, and for that there can be no excuse." And here's the thing. To some people, I could understand how you hear that and you say, okay, he apologized. He did not apologize. Abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence committed against Kenyans. By who? They waged a painful struggle against who? The British is the answer.
And I think too, like, you guys, if these are the apologies you're receiving and accepting, stop.
You need to accept
you better
better.
Stop it
Expect
right now.
better.
Okay, exactly.
Yeah.
You deserve better. There is no I am sorry. And not once does he say what he's sorry about. And I think too, what really just frustrates me is the way this is talked about too, as if, and this is a shared sorrow and a shared pain. No, it's not. Absolutely not. It is not shared. They're not on the same playing field, and they did not play the same roles in this. So I hate that it's like this like kumbaya, like we're into this is a group project. It's like, no, this was a group project for like white aristocrats and the government to like kill these Black and brown people because God forbid they wanted independence from a government that was doing nothing for them but like sucking the soul out of them and their resources. It's just it's gross. And this is 2023. Like, I know the Kenyans have to be sitting here and they're saying this. Like, do you think we're stupid? Do you think we're stupid? Like, it's offensive to my intelligence at this point.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because specifically, let's get specific, like the wrongs suffered that he's talking about. It's what's known as the emergency or the Mau Mau Rebellion, which was led by mostly, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, mostly the Kikuyu people against British colonial rule, specifically like Britain's occupying Kenya and claiming, you know, at the time, Queen Elizabeth II was considered Queen of Kenya. So the emergency is the rebellion against that. So it seems like the shared pain that Charles is referring to, it's not only because of, in his mind, Britain occupying, but also because there was this opposition inside of Kenya to independence. There were these Kenyans who preferred not to rebel, to stick with the status quo. And they were also targeted in the Mau Mau Rebellion, which I think is important to note. History, it's not black and white. There is a lot of nuance to be had here. But the rebellion itself... the rebellion itself was met with an extraordinarily violent crackdown. The British in the 1950s, this is the 1950s, this is not the 1800s, an estimated 11,000 rebels and others were killed. That's the official estimate, according to the BBC.
Jeez.
Unofficial numbers and estimates say that there were as many as 90,000 Kenyans who were executed, and over 150,000 who may have been detained, which is mind-boggling.
Wiped out, you know,
wiped
out. And like this is too when they were building the concentration camps for Kenyans and so on. Like what he is just passively talking about and refusing to say I'm sorry for is genuinely horrendous war crimes and like against humanity. It's so bad.
I'm going to read you Charles' words again. The wrongdoings of the past are a cause of the greatest sorrow and the deepest regret. There were abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence committed against Kenyans as they waged a painful struggle for independence and sovereignty. And for that, there can be no excuse. So Charles, he has claimed, and I have more of his words that we can get into, but he's claiming he wants to understand, he wants to learn and develop his comprehension of this. But whoever's written this speech for him has intentionally chosen to write it in passive voice, saying not we committed acts, but acts were committed. But also historical voice, which I think is interesting. The speech, the address makes it sound like these things happened in a time and place that is so removed from where we are now. And that's just not true. Charles was alive when this was happening, right? Like he was a child, but he was alive. This is within one lifetime. And that on top of focusing on the things happening to Kenyans, not being done by the British. So there, even as we're trying to like grapple with this, and he says he wants to deepen his understanding, there's still this divide and this wall almost being put up that is preventing us from, I think, fully grappling with like the impact that this period in history had. And the relation that people still living have to those actions and the way that they are still benefiting from that period.
And I think too, it also points to once again, how the royals can't like talk about how they were on the right side of history. They can't say, hey, behind the scenes, we were trying to tell the government, like, we shouldn't do this. We should let them be free. Like that's not happening. And we know it's not happening because they would bring it up. So instead, this is what they do. Like there's a whole section of this speech where he's talking about, you know, the British royal family's relationship with Kenya. He's talking about how William loves his places where William and Kate got engaged. He talks about how his mother came out of that tree as queen when she visited in the 1950s, but is also not mentioning why she was there during the 1950s, which would have been because of this uprising. And again, just this diplomatic, trying to charm, offense her, the country out of it type of stuff. Right. None of this stuff is mentioned. So it's like all of this listening and learning is once again all around their privileges and what they're comfortable with.
Yes.
And it's just so insidious because this is like real life. These are real people. And when they do this too, it's also another way for the British government and the Western world in general to just forget and continue to be ignorant to how much we have affected continents like Africa with slavery to this day. Like, they are completely gutted in many ways, like economically and socially. And we get to just say, gosh, these dang like Black people in their skirts and living in their huts just can't get it together. Like say those Asian folks, without mentioning the fact, no, they can't do this because the way that these countries still colonize them. France, Britain, US, we just continue to colonize them, even though they're not in, chains anymore. I mean, what's going on with Congo right now? Western, like we got blood on our hands. That's us. We helped cause all this once again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking of, I forget the terminology for it, but it's one of the pillars that upholds institutional racism is centering white comfort. And I think that's what's been done here, because it's Charles, who's the king of the United Kingdom. In his speech, he goes on.
And the British bit.
Well, yeah. But because we're pinning it on Charles as a person, I think he wants to maintain his loving grandpa image. Like, there's this I hired coddling.
The Black Choir, you guys.
Yeah, there's this coddling of the subject matter that is really icky to me, because he goes on, none of this can change the past, talking about the things he's going to do on the visit. But by addressing our history with honesty and openness, we can perhaps demonstrate the strength of our friendship today. And in so doing, I hope we can continue to build an ever closer bond for the years ahead. By addressing our history with honesty and openness, did we do that here? I don't know. So he's saying none of this can change the past, which is a common talking point when we ask for apologies and reparations. Is, well, no one alive did these things, right? but the system still exists. But the person is still in power who benefits from this, right?
Exactly. Like, come on.
So it's a sticking point that there's no easy answer to. Charles is not going to solve it himself. That's correct, but is he still part of the problem? Maybe. So the itinerary of the visit included a few things that speak to this history, including a tour of a, quote, new museum dedicated to Kenya's history. We just left it at that in the press release. He laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior at Uhuru Gardens, which this is where Camilla waited in the car. I have not seen any reporting on this, which is so fascinating. If it was Meghan, hello, we would have a national inquiry by now.
Yes. Okay.
So I don't care if Camilla was feeling tired. If she's never said she has osteoporosis, but the amount of osteoporosis causes she takes on leads me to believe that she might. Was she hurting? Yeah. I don't know. But why would you sit in the car while your husband is doing something as important as that? I don't know.
And this is where, like, I know, like I've said before, like with medical records, it's not our business, but these are the times I think actually it is our business, because again, you guys are, this is the
public
monarch
servants,
and his wife.
Technically.
Exactly. They're public servants. This kind of information actually can and should be public knowledge. And it's like times like this, like you're not doing your job. Why?
Yes.
Okay. That's understandable, but like, hey, they don't want to tell us, so the meme can live on.
She looked sinister in that car is all I'm going to say.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So a lot of the onus for these recognitions of history do fall on Charles because of that. And I don't know if that was intentional by Camilla sitting in the car or what. He also visited the site of the Declaration of Kenya's independence in 1963, celebrating the independence, but also not really recognizing, I don't think verbally, who it was from. But then we got one really interesting interaction, which I sent this to you because I was fascinated by it. I didn't see it. I saw that Charles had met possibly the oldest living person who was 117 years old, but I didn't see the context fully fleshed out until I read this article from CNN. Max Foster, I think, is a great analyst. He was one of the authors on this piece. I find the analysis here a little questionable, but the things he's pointing out are interesting.
So, let's get into this part, because my reaction was kind all caps.
kind of a bananas article. It was, yes. So Charles met as a lead-in, and this is the lead-in in the article, which is, I don't have the title of it. It's fine. Charles met a World War II veteran from Kenya who he threw his medals away, his medals of service. He threw them away in the 1950s because the Mau Mau resistance inside Kenya targeted anyone who had supported the British. So Charles, on this visit, but this man is 117 years old, allegedly. He's sitting in a wheelchair. Charles presented him with a new set of military medals. They put them together. They presented them to this man. And I think this was supposed to be, Max Foster writes, royals are all about symbolism, and this interaction spoke to everything the king and his aides were hoping to achieve on this trip. If the old medals represented a legacy of colonialism and violence, the new ones represent a redefined relationship between two independent states.
As always, insert Kenya and the Atlanta Housewives doing. Who said that? Who said that? Because I'm just like, Max, did you and the right royal aides and the white Charles say this? Because, like, did you talk to anyone on the ground? Did you talk to the people around him? Did you maybe talk to people who fought during the resistance? I don't know. It's just like, who is saying this? Who is saying those medals represent that? I'm sorry. Right. I just really was like, okay.
I find it interesting, too. Like, he can do that gesture when it comes to somebody who felt targeted because he loved the British or supported the British interests, right, during World War II.
Exactly.
Later that afternoon, the article goes on, Charles gathered representatives of those who fought against the British in Kenya during their struggle for statehood. It was a private meeting and no media were allowed to observe. But they talked to a woman named Evelyn Kimathi, whose father, Dedon, led the resistance and was executed by the British. She revealed to CNN that she had told Charles that she wanted help finding her father's body, which is missing, and that her family wanted their land back. The analysts at CNN write, as a constitutional monarch, there's little the king can do, and these demands are matters for his government. However, he can listen and make sure people like Evelyn are heard at the highest levels. That's the power of the monarchy. It can elevate issues and arguments, even if it can't be seen to influence them.
Can I go off for a second?
Sure.
I'm so heated again. Go. Oh my gosh. Okay. So for one, thank you for pointing out the fact too, with that first paragraph with how like we're redefining the relationship with the medals. It is very much describing to us of like, he's rewarding this man who fought for the British as a good thing and then being victimized by these like angry rebellion group who wanted independence. That narrative is very pointed and it is there for a reason. And it's really fucking disgusting. Frankly, it's really disgusting. You know what they're doing there, and just sickening. It makes my blood boil, especially then to meet with Evelyn, whose father helped lead this resistance and was murdered because of it, and whose body is still missing to this day because of the British soldiers. Sickening to put that narrative out and then pretend like you care and meet with her. But most of all, and I will put this on Charles and the monarchy and the British government, because I'm sure they are signing off on this narrative that Max Foster and the other author of this CNN article, and we will see with another one, I know you're going to bring up Vanity Fair, that they're pushing, which is that, see, this is the beauty of the monarch. He can listen to these people, but do nothing about it. Because that's that's what they're saying, but they're making it sound pretty. You know what I mean? Like, what is the point of her telling Charles all of this if he can't do anything about it? Like, we don't want to just be heard for not, like, what's the point of talking until we're blue in the face if nothing is going to happen? Like, that's not fun. And it's so much someone of extreme privilege to be able to act like they are a saint for listening when they know damn well they ain't going to do shit about it. And the fact, too, that was behind closed doors, I think says a lot. I don't think they wanted another Jamaica moment.
Correct.
Absolutely. We're moving on. Okay, so we're like, we're going to keep this private. I don't want her saying out loud on film, return my dad's body because your government killed him. And I know the British government wouldn't want that on record in film too. And that's why I'm saying this is also the British government. I'm sure they're right behind Charles. And for once they're all agreeing on something. We don't want to put you in the position where how we colonize and murdered people is being spread in a 10-minute clip all over the news. Like when William and Kate were told we're going our separate ways by the Jamaican Prime Minister.
But there were a lot of photos of him handing these medals to this man who had fought in World War II, So it's so interesting what causes we suddenly can take action on and we suddenly can solve for people.
Exactly.
There's always going to be a divide there.
Things. You guys notice that? It's always the charming things. We can take action when I can hand out medals, when I can find the black choir for the wedding, you know, those kind of things
we can be political when it's announcing a grant for childhood education, but we can't be political when it comes for like actually reforming the system, you know?
Exactly. When we're telling the government, hey, to stop taking poaching money, we can be political there, but I can't be political by telling the government, hey, return this woman's land.
We can be political when it comes to telling Africans to stop overpopulating because the environment is suffering. Can we go there? Because Earthshot's in our next episode.
Get him, Amanda.
Man, okay. Yes, the analysts of this CNN article and across the board, which I have another example, were giving credit to Charles because this, quote, this discussion was one example of following through on a promise, his stated goal to, quote, deepen his own understanding of these wrongs. They write, Charles' approach of confronting challenging chapters in Britain's history is a strategy we've seen from the new monarch in recent months. They don't say it's a good strategy, just it's a strategy.
Yeah. That's true.
So let me read from the article again. King Charles' moves are a progression from the way his mother operated, which is true. Queen Elizabeth never in a million years would have touched these issues, or she would have been insulated from them by everyone just thinking this is a 96-year-old woman and we don't need to bother her with this, because I think she had some baked in privilege and baked in... There was discomfort about bringing these things up with her because she was alive when they were happening and she was reigning when they were happening. So
I think of Princess Anne. Princess Anne, I'm like, that was probably Queen Elizabeth, but even worse. You know, when she like talks about slavery and stuff. And she's like, well, there's still slavery today.
Yeah, it's uncomfy.
What?
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So they go on, while Queen Elizabeth II always opted for impartiality and avoided the most sensitive political issues, Charles has shown no fear about wading into them while still finding a way to maintain a neutral position. Many, like Evelyn, will say that the struggle continues and carry on demanding formal apologies and reparations. But the response from people he meets and local politicians to Charles' actions on these trips would suggest that he is helping with some of the healing of these deep historical wounds. He may not be a political figure, but he is a symbolic one. The, quote, listening king may be giving the UK a more sensitive brand. Do you agree?
I wonder if William and him are in a competition for corny titles right now, because we have listening king and then we have like social leadership. Like, shut up. Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what is happening right now? And truly... Yeah. I just, the way they are dismissing Evelyn and people who think like her, again, so insidious. And exactly why she didn't get a photograph. Because, oh yeah, she's going to keep saying apologize, blah, blah, blah. But hey, ignore her. These people were happy to see Charles.
Absolutely.
These politicians are happy to see him. And again, you guys, unfortunately, African government is corrupt. Many African governments can be corrupt. I'm not going to say all, obviously, because there's so many different countries in there, but Kenya is absolutely one of them. Quick little side note. I'm sure you guys have heard of Mr. Beast if you have children or whatever, but he just built like, I guess all these, what do you call them? Water. He built, wells, thank you. He built wells, like 100 of them in Kenya. And that went viral. And a bunch of people on Kenyan Twitter have been tweeting about how, like, wow, this is a shame. This guy can build 100 wells in a month, but our government just embezzles the money.
Yeah.
And again, a representation of kind of what's going on. So it's also one thing starting over. One thing that is also know that oftentimes these politicians like to embezzle money and then have offshore accounts, which can be in Europe. And they oftentimes too really love European beauty of standards, that way of living. You know, that's something they love. So they love the royal family. That's something they connect to and think is just like the epitome of class. So it's not shocking that they love Charles. It's not shocking that this older generation loves the royal family. But it gets a lot different when you get to the younger generations, or you get to the older generations that didn't fight for the British Army, but they fought it for the resistance. So when they dismiss Evelyn like that, and they're just trying to pretend like, hey, but more people are happy about him than not, it's not accurate. It's very sinister, and it's leaving out so much important context to why there can be such a different reaction to him from the same exact people in the same country.
Yes. Yeah. And that reminds me, like, before this trip even kicked off, I saw some interviews from Kenyan media of people on the street just asking if they were excited. And they said, no, it's nice that he's coming to visit, but what is this going to do for us, basically?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
it
I
brings
see
us back.
like, we're a hospitable country, so of course we'll greet anyone who comes, but okay.
Right.
Like, that's
enjoy your
a lot
trip.
of what it is. Yeah, exactly.
Have a fun vacation. I don't know. And that brings us back to the issue of, like, who are these trips for and who gets to call them a success or a failure? So an article that Alex sent me right after from Vanity Fair, of all places, deemed the Kenya trip a resounding success. And so they also give us a little bit of food for thought here about the goals of a state visit. Once again, they note, interestingly, that the trip was at the request of the British government, which is interesting to me, who has read the royal family's website, because in their announcement of the visit, the royal family, where is it? The royal family said, the visit is at the invitation of President Ruto. So who is it? Formalities that I'm just thinking too much about? Is it the British royal family saying, hey, we're coming to Kenya, give us an invitation? Is that what happened? I just find that so fascinating.
Well, it's too, because we're often told that, like, oh, well, countries ask for them to come on these tours, so I don't know why you're complaining. And
I think the countries have to ask for them. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's kind of like, oh, now you're kind of maybe revealing that they have to formally ask, but they can be kind of like hint by the British government. Like, it's time to
I think that might be what happened.
Yeah.
The Vanity Fair, I'm not going to read through all the stuff that they highlighted again, but they talk about the things that went on, and they say that the visit was seen as instrumental in developing the already close relationship between Britain and the Commonwealth country and its lucrative multi-million-pound trade partnership. Like we said, lots of things going on. The politics of it all, sure, they might have been a resounding success, but I don't know.
The social politics weren't, though. That's the thing. Right. Because I think too, this is really shocking that this article coming out, because this was after it would have been exposed by a Kenyan journalist that the Kenyan journalists were literally like discriminated against, and that there was, he was saying at one point, a physical almost altercation with one of the British diplomats and a Kenyan journalist that's like well known and high ranking in the media, in Kenyan media. So,
and that's what I mean when we talk about who gets to call this a success, right? Western media is saying it was a success, but this award-winning African journalist is how he introduces himself on the platform formerly known as Twitter. He says multiple Kenyan-based journalists raised concerns about racial undertones during the state visit. They felt mistreated and degraded in their own country. Some of the things he's citing, we don't have to go through the whole Twitter thread, but he cited that Royal Rhoda reporters who came with the palace on this trip, which, if you didn't know, a state visit is not just the king and queen. It's not just Will and Kate going to these countries. They come with their whole staff. They come with photographers. They come with journalists. They fill up a plane.
Yes.
So reporters on the ground in Kenya talked about there were separate buses for UK media and local media. So they felt like there was the physical segregation for the royal editors, correspondents from UK, and for journalists in Kenya, which is so interesting.
Because me and you had kind of talked about this, and when we were messaging one another, it points to how even if they personally aren't being racist, how they participate in systemic racism, because the royal bead is all white except for Omid and Nika. Those are the only two people of color on there, and they are not Black, so they are in a country that's prominently Black. So when that happens, when they do engagements, any royals, the royal bead is the one who gets first priority, which means it's going to mostly be white people. And we saw these issues again in 2021 when William and Kate returned from the Jamaica tour and did that Windrush statue unveiling, because people pointed out, like, wait a minute, I am forgetting her name, but I think she works for The Guardian. And she is the one that pointed out that all of the Black, media outlets were invited to this statue unveiling, but last minute, William and Kate decided they were going to go, planned to go. They made it official. And then suddenly all of those reporters were told, sorry, you can't come because the royal beat is coming and they're now getting your passes. So that means there was no Black journalists covering that. And that is how they participate in systemic racism when it comes to the media.
Right.
Because like, it's always going to be white folks and they're going to push the Black folks out. And I mean, and I think too, you guys, this is why it's important too, when you hear about how this like Kenyan diplomat said this and that, see who that is. See if it's a British one or an American one, or if it's someone for Kenya, because they call out a UK diplomatic person who helped set up this visit. Right. And from what I'm seeing, it is, I'm not going to say her name. But it is a white woman. And she seemed to cause a lot of issues, and a lot of them are claiming it was racism, that she was aggressive towards the Black reporters, that she was constantly trying to discriminate against them and make sure they were far away from Charles and Camilla, and oftentimes giving the UK royal reporters they get to be up front. Yeah. More so.
Yeah. The Twitter thread says witnesses claim that the diplomat engaged in a physical altercation with the Kenyan envoy who played a part in making this visit a success, seemingly over his placement, which she believed was obstructing coverage of the royal visit. So again, like prioritizing the comfort and access of visitors to the country over people who helped to make the visit happen, right? Of the people who are hosting you. So it's icky. Right? So there's a lot of tensions going on. Yeah.
But Western media is telling us it was a total success. So let's ignore all that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So who is this a success for is our question at the end of the day. I had another one that I bookmarked somewhere. Wait, I can't find it.
And what's sad is that this will live on in Western media and royal minds as a successful tour, even though I would say it's not. And this is why I always say it's so important to look at local media. I don't care what royal it is. Look at the local media. They will tell you more. Even if they're saying, yeah, people were happy, they'll also tell you the other side of it. I don't know. They just have a lot less bias. And again, like we've talked about the murky waters going over the Byline Times investigation, that there's a reason for the royal beat to always want to make these things sound positive, even if they're not, because they're royalists and they want these people to be successful. And also too, let's be real, the royal beat is racist. Okay. They are not the type of people, they're the type of people who would say, I didn't enslave you. Charles didn't enslave you. So why does he have to apologize? Like, get over it, you guys. It was 100 years ago. Like, these are those type of people. So even personally, their own politics and their own morals would not align with these people who want reparations and apologies too. So it's just like, no way there's going to be fair coverage on these topics.
Right. And there's also a bit of a sense of moving the goalposts too, when it comes to talking about what's a success and what's not. Because we mentioned earlier that Charles is getting praised for just listening. The Vanity Fair article writes, the tour's success will be a relief to palace aides and government officials following mixed responses to previous royal tours to the Caribbean carried out by Prince William and Kate Middleton and Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. I find it interesting that we're acknowledging Edward and Sophie here. That's fascinating to me. But their tours were not great either. They write, according to one royal insider, there is a sense of relief that this went so well and a feeling that the king and queen have hit the right notes. So internally at the palace, they also think that this was a success. Next year, we will see them carrying out a more extensive tour of the Commonwealth, possibly to Australia and New Zealand, which will be very fun to cover. And they cite the fact that Kenya has been such a success bodes well. Charles and Camilla are said to be delighted with how the tour went and pleased to have had the opportunity to spotlight causes they champion at home and around the world.
I don't know if they have too much faith in people to realize it was a disaster and they just don't want to admit it, but I truly hope someone knows it wasn't that. And I'm predicting now they will be staying away from predominantly Black countries for a long time. I mean, we'll talk about for the the next episode, but I know I've told you personally, I think there is a reason why, more than just what the Philippines have to offer in terms of, being eco-friendly and stuff, of why William went that way to an Asian country and why I think
Singapore
continue. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Singapore. And why they will continue to go in that direction because places like Singapore are historically very royalist and love the British royal family. And I think they know by now they're going to have a lot more issues in Black countries asking for apologies and reparations, and we won't really be seeing them visit those countries.
No, it's
I'm sure a lot more Canada, New Zealand.
Well, for sure. It comes back to what you are looking to highlight, what you're looking to underline, which on this trip were, hey, look at Charles. He can listen to these moments. Even though he can't do anything, this is setting him apart from his mother. We're actually acknowledging that these controversies exist. We're not really trying to solve them, but we're trying to not sweep them under the rug anymore. So again, the bar is on the floor. So in that way, they've moved the goalposts to a place that, Charles is woke compared to Queen Elizabeth II, right?
So cute.
It's adorable. But
that woman's barely 10 feet under, and they're just throwing her under the bus now.
I mean, are we the person who said some of that stuff in the Vanity Fair article was Ed Owens, who is the historian and the author of the book After Elizabeth, which Omid Scobie has a book coming out called Endgame, which is about where the royal family goes from here after Elizabeth. This is another one if you're interested in two of those kind of books. After Elizabeth is already out. Pretty good, actually, I think. Pretty comprehensive. He's the one who notes, this wasn't the formal apology some had hoped for, but then again, everything the king says in these moments is essentially adhering to UK government foreign policy. Yeah. So being able to put those caveats in for Charles when we need to is fascinating. One other thing, which maybe takes us into the point where we're going to stop this episode and what we're going to pick up next episode, which is Earthshot and environmentalism. Charles actually used the Kenya trip in an interesting way for his climate change advocacy, for his environmentalism work. During the Kenya trip, so they were on this trip, Buckingham Palace announced that Charles will attend the opening ceremony of the World Climate Action Summit at COP28 in December. He didn't go to COP27, I think, because Liz Truss didn't want him there. Was that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, because he was announced to go, and then she told him no, and they had announced he wasn't going.
Yeah, so he's going now to the next one. Yep. COP, if you didn't know, it's an annual meeting of world leaders related to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's the COP21 summit, which was in 2015, that gave us the Paris Agreement. So there is meat here. Interestingly, I didn't realize this. I didn't put these dots together. Charles delivered the opening address at that summit in 2015, where we got the Paris Agreement. Wow. So this is a big part of his package as king, I guess.
Also, laying groundwork too. I am going to absolutely shit on William for some of the statements he made during his interview he did, because I will just leave off saying now, William would say what he wants, and obviously we said a lot about Charles here, but I will give that man one thing. Before even Meghan came along and put a name to it, he has been doing measured impact with his work since he was literally in his 20s. Okay, you guys, and the environment stuff is one of them. You want to talk about the times when actually Charles was ahead of his time and was unfortunately getting shit on for that. It's that point right there, 2015, talking about the environment, pushing the government to make legislation. It was very unpopular then, and he did those things, and it has a positive effect. There's an impact. Okay,
it's not just. I love that he didn't give it up when he became king, because he's going to quote launch the inaugural COP28 Business and Philanthropy Climate Forum, which will convene business, finance, and philanthropy leaders alongside world leaders to accelerate climate and nature solutions and drive delivery and results. First of all, doesn't that sound like the Earthshot initiative? Delivering results.
Maybe that's why William shaded his daddy during that interview.
Maybe. But I find it so interesting that this was all announced against the backdrop of the Kenya trip. He actually worked the COP28 announcement into a speech at the United Nations office in Nairobi, which apparently is the only UN headquarters in a Commonwealth nation, which is interesting.
Wow.
I was glossing over that. Charles said there, as we look ahead to COP28 in another month's time, we must remember what President Ruto said at the Africa Climate Summit. We go far when we go together. So all of this, to me, is underscoring that when Buckingham Palace wants to make things connect, and wants to make things hit home, they will do it. If they wanted to, they would.
It was very good planning.
Yes. So well orchestrated.
And I think too, a good foresight of like, hey, there's probably is going to be bumps during this trip. So let's make sure we pack in some announcements, you know, which is like this one. And also at the very end, immediately, like before they had barely left Kenya, rolling out the stories about his birthday's coming up and this poor father trying to talk to his son, Harry, who is obviously his favorite and not William. You know, they planned. I'll give them that. The PR, those spin doctors was spitting and they spun well. Okay.
Exactly. And like when I talk about things aren't black and white, you know, there are so many different angles from which you have to look at the royal family. And this is one of them. Like they can be doing really good work in one area and really be falling short in another. And it just so happens that addressing their own racial history is one area that they fall short in.
Exactly. So, they're always going to remove themselves from the issue, whether it's the racism or like the environmentalism. Ignore my private jets, because obviously Charles has a huge footprint and he could do more to make it smaller, but he doesn't. But he also does really good work. It's kind of the, you know, the same thing with William. His work isn't as good, but you know, I mean, if you think about it, the funny thing is the Queen was probably the most environmental friendly one out of all of them, but she doesn't give a shit about the environment. She's just like taking the train and stuff. But, hey, like, I don't know, so, rich people, right?
Right. So I don't know. Just if I'm going to leave you with anything from this segment, it's literally just remember that there are so many angles from which you can approach an issue. These unilateral statements of this is good or this is bad do not help us in understanding and picking apart these really, really weighty conversations. I bookmarked, it was a deranger tweet, but I bookmarked it because it starts out, no matter how trolls on Twitter or tabloids try to publish false information, the king and queen are loved by the people. This was a successful and joyful state visit. And it's like, okay, you can say whatever you want. You can say that. It's fine. It doesn't make the information presented that you don't agree with false. And also that's what I want people to realize.
About the British people. Yeah, like that trip was about the Kenyans. It's not about them. So also stop centering these European people and their feelings and things that actually, like, that's not the fucking priority. It's just like, like, this is the issue. But you guys, this was a really good episode. I mean, if I do say so myself.
I can't wait to listen to it. No.
I know, right? I do love it. I love it. And it was really great info dumping on you guys. And I hope you enjoyed it. Okay. Pinkies up. Catch us on Lady Audacity. You can catch Amanda, a matter of fact, on her Instagram and her TikTok. And of course, her Substack, The Fascinator, which is amazing. You know, I'm on Duchess MM Grace for my, you know, more personal IG, but I'm always manning Lady Audacity or trying to. And thank you guys for being here with us. Pinkies up and fight the power.
Amen.
Fight the power. Okay. Bye.